everyone, it's your kawaii boy Monty. Thank you for coming to be cute with me today. And, okay. So if you're a regular subscriber of mine, you're probably coming here thinking why I'm suddenly talking about game dev. And if you're somebody that's involved in game dev, you're probably wondering why there's a game dev video coming from somebody whose channel involves him regularly dressing up like this. And the answer to all of that, and really the whole core of this video that I'm making here, is just a matter of that I wanted to try something new. Now, like a lot of people, I love video games. My personal playstyle when it comes to all sorts of video games is a lot more carefree and gentle than what some other more hardcore gamers would prefer. But I've always loved them, I really enjoy playing them, and I always have ever since I played my first game that I ever got. It was Kirby's Dream Land for the Game Boy. I got it from some used game store, and ever since then I think that's colored my personal taste in video games. But just because you like something, that doesn't make you an expert in how to create said thing. I know nothing about code. I know even probably less about game design. I am a 2D artist, but I don't really sprite or really like to sprite. And as far as 3D art is concerned, all I've made is a fucking donut, and honestly, who hasn't at this rate? And I definitely wouldn't call myself a computer smart person. My spouse has to tell me every week how to do the screenshot Windows command. I barely know what is actually in my PC. I personally be what I consider probably one of the least qualified people to make a video game. But the thing is, I semi-regularly use itch.io. I use it to check out a bunch of indie games, both for video games and also for TTRPGs. And like a bunch of other artists, I use it to sell my own digital books. I have a mini comic on there, and I have a zine on there as well. But of course, when it comes to itch.io's core, it's all about indie gaming. And that isn't any clearer considering the fact that there is a huge community for game jams on there. And they don't hide it. They don't hide the calendar. It's there. So I have perused it, and sometime a couple months ago, before making this video, I decided to peruse it seriously. I've been a digital artist for a really long time, and I was craving learning how to use a new skill. And looking through the calendar, I ended up finding the perfect jam to enter. The Newbies Game Jam, hosted by Cosmotion. As it said in the name, this game jam is targeted towards very new game developers. I believe the thing that qualifies you as new is if you have 2 years or less total of game dev experience. So that was perfect. That was perfect for me. My game dev experience was about a week total because I have fiddled around with tools such as RPG Maker and Twine and Ren'Py, and my spouse's personal program of choice is Godot, so I've fiddled, but I've never made anything, so this would be perfect for me. I wasn't sure if I would even make anything in the end or if it would even be good, but I decided to click enter and give it a try. So let's see what happened when I tried making a game with absolutely no experience whatsoever. So, when I joined the official jam, I also joined the Discord that was connected to it. I ended up entering pretty early. I think it was about a month before the jam submissions were open, and I was really hyped to see what the theme would be. There are a lot of themes to go through. Personally, I voted for raccoons as a theme because I don't know. I mean, raccoons are neat. But eventually the theme was announced, and the theme for this jam was death equals progress. Now, when this theme dropped, to be honest, I was a little bit concerned. Here I was, entering my first jam, knowing for a fact that I have no knowledge about coding or game design, and here already the theme was something that potentially implied something that's mechanics-based. I don't know mechanics. I know nothing about them. I don't know how to make them happen. What are the mechanics of auto repair simulator?
You're the mechanic.
But I committed. I committed to this jam, and I wanted to make do with what I had. Also, during this last week before the jam started, I was experimenting with programs that used visual scripting, or basically any program really that would allow me to make games without having to know code. And the program that I eventually chose, and also currently now really like to use, is GDevelop. It's an open source software, I believe. The main perk with GDevelop is that it has a lot of pre-installed behaviors that allows you to install really basic physics and game mechanics right out of the box. It took me like literally 10 minutes or so to be able to get the basics of a platformer going. Again, I have no experience. I know nothing about code or game mechanics, and yet GDevelop was able to do a lot of the work for me. So I knew it was a perfect match, and with the theme in hand, and with me knowing what program I was gonna use, I had to come up with a battle plan. What was my base game idea going to be? Well, the first general idea I had was this game where you play as a cat and you shed your 9 lives throughout the levels or stages or what have you. It turns out 4 other people had that same idea, and we all ultimately decided that was But then the actual idea hit me. I would do a game that had a narrative focus, that had platformer movement, that has you as the player guiding a spirit to their final resting place, with bits and pieces about that spirit's life sprinkled throughout the stage. Now, some of you gamers out there might be thinking, does Monty like Spiritfarer? Well, I want to let you know now, this totally has no influence whatsoever on all my hours of Spiritfarer, on all the love that I have for Spiritfarer, on how meaningful of a game Spiritfarer is to me. No way. There's just no way that could influence that at all. It's impossible. It's a completely original idea. I wanted to do more on the day before the jam, but to be honest with you, I stayed up all night in my time zone to see what the theme would be, and I just kind of went to sleep, so completely off topic. But this is my new friend, Patchy. He's a bag, and he's the most perfect thing ever on this planet. If he asks for your credit card number, don't worry about it. Just don't. So, the jam officially began. Frankly, on day 1, I didn't get much done because, hi, surprise, I have chronic pain and sometimes that gets in the way of being able to do things. But what I was able to do that was very crucial was to set down a proper schedule, to break up all of the tasks I needed to get done that would eventually lead me to a complete game. So during this time before the jam, I had been watching a YouTuber's videos, HEARTBEAST'S. HEARTBEAST has a lot of videos and vlogs and devlogs and what have you about making games, namely videos about Godot, but what stuck out to me were HEARTBEAST videos on producing games and the kind of schedule you have to create when making them, especially when you're having a jam in mind. HEARTBEAST uses a strategy where you separate pre-production and production, with pre-production being called prospecting, the stage where you sort of experiment and figure out what you have with your concept to see if it's viable, and the other half, where if your prospecting stage is successful, then you move on to finalize, actually make the thing. And that's what guided me in making my schedule in how to make the game. That's all I did for day 1, but it was a very important step. When day 2 came around, I was ready to go. I was really frustrated that I couldn't actually open GDevelop yesterday, so I was ready to open it today and get something actually going. Because GDevelop is so predisposed to platformers, I was able to get the base elements down for a prototype really quickly, really easily. I had stand-ins for the character, the spirits, the platforms, and the way to end the level. And also the little bits of lore that your character touches. Being able to translate the logic of GDevelop's if-then system into actually getting the character moving, it was a lot to learn. I think it still is a lot to learn, but I was able to get it done eventually. This is probably one of the many parts of the video where I have to thank my spouse, Q, who is actually a game developer, very experienced in programming and software, who looked over my code and looked over my game and saw that for the little bits of lore that you touch throughout the stage, I wasn't using variables for those and making those individual objects, which was bloating the code and bloating the asset menu. So I want to thank them for helping me figure that out. It was at the end of day 2 where I started actually feeling a little bit discouraged. I had worked for hours and hours and hours and hours that day to get a prototype going, and there was still so much more to do. The thing about being an artist is that your solutions are often, not always, but often quite subjective. But in the case of game development, if your solution isn't the correct one, it's probably not going to work. And that's really frustrating. This was something that was very new to me, and this was going to be my very first taste of what trying to make things work in game dev is like. On day 3, nothing got done at all. I was very low on sleep. I was having a mega migraine. My spouse also slept very horribly due to some side effects of some antibiotics they were taking. And honestly, errands needed to be done, so I was just not going to think about it. Day 4 was when disaster struck. And the worst part about the disaster was that I could have prevented it. So I was working on the game again in GDevelop, and I was trying to figure out how to work this dialogue box behavior. I was having a lot of trouble figuring out, so I just kind of rage quitted out of the program and stopped. But it was after that I quit the program when I realized that GDevelop was updating to a new version. I opened the program and my project was gone because I saved my project in the actual GDevelop program folder and not in a separate folder like in my documents. This was a pure clown moment. I was really frustrated, but eventually I was able to restart it from scratch and rebuild what I had before. But even that wasn't so easy, because this new version of GDevelop apparently had a new bug that affected variables that was calling specifically for numbers when that's not necessarily what you want. In the words of William Shakespeare, this fucking sucked. But Q gave me some really important moral support and I was able to eventually get everything back in order. And I did figure out the dialogue box behavior. With the platforms, the character, the spirit, the moving, the end of stage, and the lore bits, and also the dialogue box implemented, that means on day 4, my MVP was complete. It was at the end of this day that I started realizing that game development kind of feels like a cycle that involves a continuous flow of suffering, figuring out how to solve that suffering, and feeling really elated and happy when it works. And then the cycle just continues again. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what I gleaned from it so far. Day 5 came around and I decided, well, yesterday really sucked. Let's do something that's more in my comfort zone. The basic part of the game was in place now, so I had to start working on actual assets. And this started with character design. I really didn't want a sprite, and so originally I wanted to go for sort of a Paper Mario sort of motif, but I decided to just play to my strengths and just go with my usual style. And also I felt like the Paper Mario motif might have ruined the potential tone that I had in mind for this game. It's not necessarily dark, but I wanted it to be like at least a little bit somber. So the first thing to design was the main character, who at this point I already decided is going to be a sort of Reaper looking guy, you know, looking fellow, looking person. I got a few designs out and I ended up picking one that I liked. And the last thing I did at the end of this day that was completely unrelated to character design is that I started using Lab Chirp to generate sounds, and I ended up making the dialogue beep boops on this time and implementing them. Day 6. Animation. I hate it. Days 7 and 8 aren't very eventful. I had to do a lot of things, and one of those things included my spouse Q's birthday, and I also had to help take them to a lab that was a 50-minute commute away because it is a mistake to get sick in France when it's August. But I did at least start thinking about what sort of stories I wanted to tell for these spirits. When day 9 rolled around, I was back to work and I wanted to get the writing done for these characters. My original plan for this game was to have 3 stages ready. And from my list of story ideas that I had picked 3 that I thought would be really strong contenders. The first one was Casey, who was pretty easy to write. I had a very clear story in mind for them, and I really also wanted them to be the first spirit that you meet in this game. So I got Casey's story outline done and quick and over with not really any problems. Now, the reason why it's only Casey in the final game and I didn't get to finish the 2 other spirits is because I realized when writing them that they had problems. The character I had in mind for the second stage, his name was Jericho. Unlike Casey, he's a much older man who dies at like a proper age for, dying of natural causes. And the thing with people that live longer is that there's more in their life to talk about. There's more years. So when I was doing the writing for his outline, it just kept going and going and going and going. And I eventually, I couldn't think of where to go next. There was just too much to sift through. As for the third character, Lei, I had to actually stop very abruptly in her writing because I remembered that this is a family-friendly jam. And Lei swears a lot, like a lot. It's part of her personality. It's actually integral to her writing. And so for that reason, I could not include her at all in this jam. And knowing that it was day 9, I figured that I probably don't have enough time to flesh out the stages for the other characters, their outlines, and that I would just try to aim strictly for Casey's, just to get theirs done. And that if I did incidentally have time later to make more, then I would. On day 10, I finished the first animation that would be like the final asset for the game. And that was the idle animation for the player character. Seeing it finished, I started hating animating a little less. Now, I was a little confused at first when I actually implemented it into the game because there was some weird pixeliness going on with it. I double checked to make sure that I had smoothing on and also anti-aliasing on, and I was just really confused why it was still pixely. It was scaling fine, it's just no matter what I did, it would just have a pixely edge, and I wasn't sure why. On day 11, I figured out why. So one of my main strategies as an artist is to start with a really big canvas, much bigger than is actually necessary, so that when you scale down the final product, it looks a little less bad. It's just for my own, personal confidence. And this came back to bite me when I was making the assets for this, because the canvas I tend to start with by default is a 3000 by 3000 pixel one. If you regularly work with assets in game dev, I'm sure you're probably screaming right now, as this thing was just now learning the importance of proper size scaling when it comes to games. So I scaled them all the way down to a more appropriate size. And just like that, it fixed the pixeliness. It's as if GDevelop didn't have to work overtime to load the assets into the game anymore. With this knowledge, I moved ahead and I finished all of the animations necessary for the player. It was at this moment where I got a really fuzzy feeling inside. It felt really special to see the character that I had animated, that I had put time into, that I had made sure to teach to move properly, to finally put all of those pieces together and to see that, they were alive. They were moving on command and acting appropriately with those movements. They were really crude and basic, yes, but it felt very alive to me, and that's something I'd never felt before with all of the mediums that I've ever worked with. It was really beautiful, and I was really relishing that moment for a little while before I realized, I should probably work on the itch.io page to see that works and it looks decent, and just to see that the game would function in browser on the page. Spoilers. It did, and after that, I ended the day by starting to craft the level for Casey. Day 12, I didn't work on the project. I was once again feeling a lot of chronic pain that day. I think all of the days on working on the project for the jam was starting to really get to my health, so I took that day as time to rest. Day 13 out of 15 was when panic started to set in. The assets for basically everything except for the characters weren't finished yet, and I hadn't even thought what I would do with audio. So this was a very productive day. I worked really hard to finish all of the assets for the stage. I also picked out some really nice royalty-free music. Thank you to the king, Kevin MacLeod, otherwise known as Incompetech, for the awesome free music that he puts out in the world. And I also got a functional title screen going. Day 14. I installed the final dialogue that was going to be used in all the dialogue boxes and all of the little lore bits for KC stage. This turned out to be a mistake because I hadn't tested the SFX yet. And I had to test that multiple times while going through the text of all that dialogue that I've written, that beautiful dialogue that I've seen 5 billion times, to see if a beep goes off. So with all of that, I added the stage select, I added the SFX, and I also finished the art for the title screen and the itch.io page. Day 15. So the game, or at least one stage of the game, with all that I was able to get out in time, is basically complete. It has all the elements there. It's of course not perfect because I think it has to be impossible to get a perfect game out for a jam, right? Everything was put together. I could call it done. Except the thing is that titles are important. In order to have the title screen that I had installed, I had to have a title to put on it. So I consulted my favorite technique whenever I try to figure out the title for something, the word web. It's where you write down just a bunch of words, all of the words that come to mind when you think of the creation that you've made, every single little adjective, every noun, every theme. Just write it all down, all on a vast web, and just put together the ones that sound good. The first idea for a title I had was Tales of the Reaper, but that was taken. That's a metal album. And after that was Reaper Tales, which was a horror TV series, and there was also Passing Tales, which was a short story anthology. I was left with 2 potential titles, Fables of the Reaper and Tales in Passing. I was keen to both. I think Fables of the Reaper sounded cooler for some reason, but Tales in Passing was really strong, especially because it had double meaning. I fielded it to Q, and they were definitely a lot stronger on Tales in Passing, exactly because of its double meaning. The game, or at least the way I envisioned it, is an anthology of a bunch of tales, and they're all about spirits that are in the process of passing away. So, Tales in Passing. All that was left was to finalize the itch page, which, to be honest, it felt like it took like 5 minutes compared to everything else that I had done during the jam that week. I finalized the page, I made sure everything I had to put for credit and all that was there, made it a smidge pretty, or at least like, not the default itch.io white blank thingy. And the most important part was that I play tested the final game as it was uploaded on browser. It wasn't perfect. Most notably was that it seemed to struggle at first with loading the audio, so in the very beginning of the game, a lot of the audio was delayed on command. But other than that, I was done. I did it. My first game jam ever, and I turned something in. I made a game from thin air. I made a game when I hadn't made one before, and I was really happy with that. So, the submission period was officially over, and now it was time for the judging. A total of 490 people had originally joined the jam, and that resulted in 76 projects being submitted. And I personally felt really proud being able to be part of that 76. Now that the submission period was over and it was time for judging, it hit me. This extra bonus about game jams that I didn't consider when I first entered. I get to play a bunch of games. Like, a bunch of people created a bunch of games, and now I get to play them for free. I get to have fun for free. So throughout the judging period, I ended up playing all of them. Okay, well, not actually all. There were a couple that I ended up not playing because it was just really too inconvenient, or I was physically unable to actually launch them. There were a couple of mobile games, and there was even a game that was strictly VR, and I know for a fact I could not play that one. Naturally, it's a jam, there's gonna be a lot of roughness. I think that's probably very normal for game jam entries, and there were also a lot of entries that in my opinion, were good, but I couldn't truly judge them all the way down because they were in genres that I personally don't seek out to play and even don't really even like. I'm not really a fan of puzzle games or shooters, and definitely not rage games. I'm not the kind of gamer that really plays video games to feel challenged or accomplished. I'm personally more of a gamer that likes to come to video games to escape from challenge and sort of immerse myself in whatever narrative or story the game has to provide. But despite all of that, there were a good number of games that I really enjoyed and that I commented on and that I was really happy with. So to showcase those, I'm going to list my top 5 favorite games from the Newbies Game Jam 2. Number 5 was Soul Carver by Redox Chai. It's a really simple game. It's essentially a flapper. In my opinion, a very interesting flapper that involves a little bit of strategy. It's also got some pretty cute art. Number 4, Die Skull Repeat by Skull Buns. When it came to the theme and working with it mechanically, there were a lot of entries that had to do with having your character die on purpose and using their leftover body to help you traverse obstacles and get you through levels. Out of all of the entries that fit this bill, this one had to be my favorite. It had, in my opinion, the best stages, and it had a lot of charm. I mean, the main character winks at you when it dies. Like, I mean, how can you not be charmed by that? Number 3, Dungeons and Dwarves by High Lord. I love grid-based strategy, and I found this game to be a pretty good example of it. It was very well balanced, it had quirky writing in between the stages, and I personally found the gameplay with you being a lich, summoning minions, and then combining some of your minions together to make lich abominations to make them stronger. I thought that was really fun. Also, hi. I see you there with the Dimitri icon. You have the Dimitri icon and you made a tile-based strategy. I know what you're doing. Number 2, Alice in Borderland by Aver. In terms of experiences, this game was just really beautiful. It was really fun to move through and fun to maneuver through, which I think is one of the simplest things you can really do in a game that creates a fun experience for the player. A game that's just fun or interesting to exist in, to just stand in and do nothing and soak in the sights. It's like, yeah, I don't want to live here. This world is kind of messed up that you kind of made, but like it's really fun to be in. And that to me is a sign of a game that has really good design. And my personal number 1 favorite game that I really liked was Nin's Sin Removal Service by Mincon. It's an RPG where in your failed ritual you end up summoning the manifestation of your own sins. And can I just say, yes, the jam was 2 weeks long, but what kind of mad lad do you have to be to decide, yes, for this game jam that has a short period of time, I'm gonna make an RPG. That's what I'll do. Who makes an RPG in that short of a time? Apparently Mincon did, and I really enjoyed it. It was really well polished. The graphics were incredible. It was really clever writing, IMO. I both really understood the themes of what was going on, and I thought the dialogue was very funny. You made an RPG for a 2-week jam. That was probably the most impressive thing to me out of anything. So the judging period passed by and the final results came in. And when this came in, I was a little nervous. I definitely didn't enter this jam with the intention of winning, especially since there isn't really a prize other than bragging rights. And also, it was really unrealistic for me to win anything, or let alone even place high. But I still wanted to rank relatively well. So I figured, okay, there were 76 total entries. Out of those 76, I think I'd be happy with 20th. That was what felt to me a realistic number. 15th was a little closer to ideal, but 20th was my educated guess. The final results came in, and turns out I got 11th place. That's not bad. I'm really happy with that. I feel like that's really good. I got 2nd place total when it came to audio, which I kind of feel bad about because I didn't make any of it really on my own, unless you're counting Lab Chirp, but that's just me pressing random and just seeing what sound good and then just like tweaking it a little bit. And I definitely did not make the music. Once again, that's the king, the Lord, the savior, Kevin MacLeod, otherwise known as Incompetent. That's his doing. I did not make any of that. All I did was choose what sounded good, I guess. So I don't know, maybe that was effective with it in the end. Also, a lot of the entries just kind of didn't have sound or music, so maybe that was also another factor. Out of all of the elements that were going to be judged, the one that mattered the most to me was the quality element, because I did the best I can, at least to my ability, to make sure that the complete experience was just that. It was a complete game. It had animations, it had sound, it had gameplay, you know, all of that stuff. It was all functional. That was important to me. And I ended up getting 15th in that. That was the exact spot I was expecting for an overall score, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now, as for the top 3 winners, I was very pleased to see that a couple of my favorites did make it to the top 3. Making it 3rd place was Die Skull Repeat. I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm glad it made it there. I'm glad that I think a lot of people agreed with me that out of all of the games that used that specific mechanic, that was a really, really strong entry. Another strong entry was what won 2nd place. It was a game called Armored Spirit. That was really well tightly put together and also made really good use of the death equals progress mechanic. And finally, in the top spot in 1st place was Dungeons and Dwarves. I felt very satisfied that one of my top 5 made it to the very 1st spot. High Lord clearly put a lot of effort into making the game well put together and making it complete, and I'm glad that it showed with everybody's voting. Unfortunately, the other 3 games on my top 5 did not make it to a very high spot and actually scored lower than how I did, which I don't really feel like I deserve as much because I really liked their entries. Kind of a bummer that, you know, the rest of the entrants, I guess in the majority, didn't really see what I saw or the fun that I had in those games. So they're not in the top 5, but they're in the top 5 in my heart, you know, so they're good. They're good games. Go play them. I'm going to link all of them in the description. Please go play them. Now, something that I was not expecting when I first entered the jam was the sense of community that comes up when the judging period happens. You have a lot of people playing a lot of people's creations, and they're communicating with each other. They're commenting, they're play testing everything, and it was a lot more connecting and talking and commenting than I had first anticipated. And when it was happening, it was honestly really fun, and it's something that added color to the positive experience I had overall with this game jam. I was really happy to be playing other people's games and leaving comments to tell them my thoughts, and feeling happy knowing that people recognized that their work was getting acknowledged and hearing positive things about it and hearing concrete. So what were the comments on my game? I was honestly a little nervous because while I'm really open to concrete, it's still, emotionally speaking, it's still something that I have to think about, that I have to process, that I have to be sort of ready for. And knowing my lack of experience and knowing that deep down my game doesn't really have much actual gameplay in mind, I was scared of what people were going to say. But ultimately, the comments that people left on my game were all really good. Obviously, something that was very valuable that was left was constructive criticism, just little tidbits, little tips that people were suggesting that would make my game better. And like entirely 100%, not even joking, they're all actually really constructive and really helpful, and you can tell that they're given in good faith. They're given from other game developers and from players that see the beauty in what you made and only want to see it become even better. So yeah, people left a lot of advice on my game, little things that can improve, but they also left a lot of really just in general positive comments, things that they enjoyed as is. And all of this put together gave me the simple but still really impactful realization that people were playing my game. They were playing something that I had made myself, that I put out there with no experience. And the biggest part of all of that, the thing in the comments that I was seeing most often that affected me the most, was that people were feeling something from what I made. And that knowledge, it's heavy and it's really impactful and meaningful. When I entered this jam, I had just the strongest feeling that I just would not do this well. I wouldn't do well at all. I still don't know any coding. I now have a total of 3 weeks of game dev experience, and that pales in comparison to all of the major game devs out there, not to mention the ones that are academically studying game design. What I make was different from what other game devs were making, and that worried me. I knew I lacked the knowledge to make tight platformers or really clever puzzles or to use really fun, intuitive game mechanics. But those comments, the emotions that people were expressing that they felt because of what I made, and also what this jam has ultimately taught me, is that I, despite having no experience, despite having nothing, despite knowing nothing and only knowing a little more now than I did before, I have something to contribute to game dev. So if I have something to put out there, then I think you do too. I want to say thank you again to all of my wonderful supporters on my Patreon who help support me financially and emotionally every single month. I always appreciate it. I want to give a special shout out to my top tier chosen one patrons: Amelia Peterson, Labelle Romley, Thank You, Mary Magdal, and Songbirdo. This has been Monty, your kawaii boy. Thank you for listening to all 30 something minutes of this video. It was quite a chonker to work with. And as always, remember, every day is a great day to uplift yourself and others. I hope this has helped you. Bye.